Crawford, the director of the Morehouse College Martin Luther King Jr. Collection. And I'm here backstage with producer and director Hal Jacobs, who has produced the film Breaking the Silence. We're also going to bring in later Charles Black, who's a Morehouse College alum, and he was a former activist in the Atlanta student movement of the 1960s. First, we're going to start out. I want to introduce Hal a little bit more. Hal brings a career of freelance writing and developing written and video resources for higher education into film work. And this work focuses on arts, social justice, and the environment. The Lillian Smith documentary, in collaboration with his son, is his first full-length project and was recently awarded Best Documentary at the Macon Film Festival. His next project looks at a liberal arts education program taking place in Georgia prisons called Common Good Atlanta. I want to welcome you here today, Hal and Charles. Can you talk a little bit about how you got involved in making this film about Lillian Smith? How did this evolve, and what kinds of challenges did you face in doing the research and uncovering material on Lillian Smith?
Well, thank you, Vicki, and it's great to be here, and we're really proud to be part of this festival. It means a lot to us because of the connections that Lillian Smith had with some of the people at Morehouse. When we started it, we had no idea what we were getting into. We thought we were telling the story of this novelist who was famous for a brief time and then just sort of faded away. We knew that she had a girls' camp, but basically that was it. I mean, I had never heard of her until basically the spring of 2017. I had done another short documentary about another independent, feisty woman who kind of lived nearby, and people kept asking me if I knew anything about Lillian Smith. And so, I went to Wikipedia immediately. I found a little bit, and then I started reading her works, and I was just blown away. At the same time, I was reading To Kill a Mockingbird as I was reading Lillian Smith, and I'm going, why don't we know about her? Her writing is so much more complex and, to me, profound than Harper Lee and To Kill a Mockingbird, which offers all these easy sort of, situations and answers. And then I came across a book that had just been printed the year before by UGA Press, a Lillian Smith reader. And it contains a lot of her letters and excerpts from different things. And I was just totally sold at that point that we needed to tell her story. This was, coming up with the election of 2018, and things just got more and more potent. Her words against what was going on in our society and our culture and our president. And so I was very fortunate. The first person I talked with, I made a list of people that knew something about Lillian Smith. And I heard that Lonnie King had met her when he was a young man involved with the Atlanta student movement. And I was very lucky. I showed up at his house. I told him I just wanted to talk for about 30 minutes. And we talked for about 3 hours. And he made me realize how important she was to him and other people involved in the movement, black and white. That her voice sort of validated things that they were feeling and experiencing, and that here was a white woman who lived in the South. She didn't move away to New York or Paris. She stayed in the South and wrote about it, and she sacrificed a lot. She was threatened. She was burned out a couple of times. The Klan was against her, but she saw this wrong in society and just stood up against it. And spent 30 years of her life basically fighting it. I mean, basically most of her life was devoted to this sort of cause. And so from there, I went and talked with other people, about 10 other people. Some knew her personally. Some had just been studying her most of their lives, or teaching her. And it was just an amazing, experience. It took me deeper into this whole issues of whiteness than I had ever thought about before. And I grew up in the South, and she just had an impact on me and the people who were connected with her. They all just they were all filled with so much emotion and passion about what she was saying. So it didn't seem like a history lesson anymore. It seemed like something that was very current and very necessary to bring out today. So we're lucky. I feel lucky that we found her and we're able to do this story. With my son, who is a photographer, musician, he brought in a lot of his creative talents.
Well, Lillian Smith was a very strong supporter of the civil rights movement, as we know. And in the Morehouse College Martin Luther King Jr. collection, we've got correspondence between Smith and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. You want to talk a little bit about her relationship to Dr. King? She was a very early supporter of the movement and wrote to him in the early days of the Montgomery Improvement Association. In fact, let me just say that Dr. King mentions Lillian Smith in a letter from a Birmingham jail. And he says, I am thankful that some of our white brothers have grasped the meaning of this social revolution and committed themselves to it. They are still too small in quantity, but they are big in quality. And so then he goes ahead and he mentions Lillian Smith, of course, and Harry Golden and James Dabbs and some others. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I was so impressed because I didn't know they had that connection when we started. And then I see the letters. I'm going to the University of Georgia special collections and going through all the letters. And I found the letter that she wrote him during the Montgomery bus boycott. And she donated money at a time when she didn't have a lot of money. Her income sort of dried up because she was labeled a race writer at the time. But she writes him a very sweet letter, and he writes back and says something like, Miss Smith, I've written you 1,000 times in my head, but I've never put pen to paper before. And that starts this connection, this sort of friendship they have that goes on until she dies in 1966, 2 years before him. But I mean, I think he took a lot from her writings. I mean, I think she borrowed some from him. She recognized him instantly as the leader, as the person who had the right heart and spirit and using nonviolence to make the movement successful, in the States. Later, I came across the fact that she was in the car when he was arrested in DeKalb County. And basically, he was pulled over because he had a white woman in the front seat with him. And that was Lillian Smith. He was driving her from his house where they had had dinner to Emory Hospital, where she was having cancer treatment. Coretta was in the back seat. Coretta and Dr. King both write about this experience. And that arrest is what leads in October to his subsequent arrest during the Atlanta student protests. He's arrested because of the charge that he got, the traffic offense with Lillian Smith. And as a result of that, he was sent to Reidsville prison, which was basically like a death sentence at the time. It was one of the scariest moments of his life, he said later. So, I mean, it's kind of, it's so incredible to me that she shows up in such an important part of our history as well. And their writings, I mean, I think that some of their writings appear together as well. And by the early 60s, she had become sort of a sick woman. She had been dealing with cancer since the 50s, so she was definitely on her decline at this point. But she knew to step aside and let the Black voices sort of ascend and let them have the national spotlight. Whereas before, in the 1930s and 40s, she was able to say things because she had that sort of media spotlight on her, and she took advantage of it.
This might be a good place to bring in Charles Black. Charles Black, as I said earlier, is an alum of Morehouse College, and he was in the only class that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. taught at Morehouse. It was a class on social philosophy, and there were 8 students. Charles, you were involved in the Atlanta student movement. Can you talk a little bit about that movement and maybe talk about the role of people like Lillian Smith and other adults in supporting student activism?
Yeah, I'm glad to. Yeah, I succeeded Lonnie King as chairman of the Atlanta student movement. And as you mentioned, I was in the only class that Dr. King taught. Uh, and there were 8 of us. Julian Bond was one of the other folk in that class, by the way. He and I were very good friends for a number of years. Um, the world needs to know that Lillian Smith was responsible for the election of John F. Kennedy. A lot of people don't know that. And it's because of the incident that Hal mentioned. King was stopped under the pretext of the tail light being out on the car that he was driving. The real reason, of course, was that Lillian Smith, the white woman, was riding in the front seat with him. I was at the trial when the judge sat on the bench, sitting sideways with a comic book, as Attorney Donald Hollowell presented his case. And his booming voice, "But Your Honor, I submit to you that," whatever. And an awesome man who represented all of us during the student movement days. And when Donald Holloway rested his case, the judge simply said, "Are you finished?" And he banged his gavel and said 4 months in prison. So King had gotten arrested later on October 19th in a city in a Rich's department store. Lonnie King encouraged him to participate. Background important to that is that Martin Jr. had been requested by his father and the other senior Black leaders at the time not to be involved in the Atlanta civil rights activities. Their attitude was, we got this. You do Montgomery and Albany and all that stuff, that's fine, but we got this here. And so he had agreed to that and had not prior to this time been involved. And the way Lonnie got him to go to Rich's on that day was by quoting a line from King's father's sermon, which said, you can't lead from behind. Mm-hmm. And so King was persuaded to go. And he had one condition. That is, if he was going to be arrested, there should be some pretty ladies from Spelman being arrested with him. And you can see the photograph that has Marilyn Price, I think it is, being arrested with him. Now, this was 2 weeks before the Kennedy-Nixon election, and Nixon was leading by double digits 2 weeks before the election. When King was sent to prison, the Nixon campaign and the Kennedy campaign were trying to decide if in any way they should get involved. And while the Nixon people were still contemplating the matter, Bobby Kennedy and a Black guy on their staff, whose name I'm not remembering, convinced John Kennedy that they should do something. And so Robert Kennedy makes a call to the judge, and the judge allowed King to get out of prison. Now, when King was sent down to Reedsville, as Hal had mentioned, it was in the dark of night. I think it was about 3 o'clock in the morning. And his wife had not been notified. The attorney had not been notified. And he was put in a paddy wagon with a loose German Shepherd dog in the paddy wagon with him. And that's when King said that was the most frightening time that he had experienced. Mm-hmm. So what the Kennedy campaign did, after calling and getting King out of jail, they published what came to be known as the Blue Bomb. I have a copy of it in my hand here now. And it was called that because it was printed on blue paper. And it was distributed in all the major cities around the U.S. that had large Black populations. And it was at the top of it says, "No comment Nixon," that was in quote, "No comment Nixon," versus a candidate with a heart, Senator Kennedy. And then bold print, "The case of Martin Luther King." And there are quotes inside from Mrs. King, Daddy King, Martin Jr., and and Dr. Gardner Taylor, I think it is. Let me see. Yeah, Dr. Gardner Taylor. And King Sr. had previously said that he didn't know if he could vote for a Catholic for president, you know. But after this development, they were all laudatory of Kennedy. And for the first time, Black voters all across the country switched from Republican to Democrat in their voting in that election. And Kennedy won by less than one vote per precinct nationwide on the average. And that action is what made all the difference. And there's no question in anybody's mind who's done an analysis of that election, that event of King being arrested and Kennedy's intersection, led to the election of John F. Kennedy. It should be noted, however, that all the major cities where blacks switched from Republican to Democrat, it happened everywhere except in one city, Atlanta. And that was because of a guy named John H. Calhoun, who was Republican, black guy, who was the penultimate organizer, community organizer. Mm-hmm. And he kept the black community in the Republican column for that election.
Wow. Thanks for that history, Charles. I want to just step back a moment to talk about Lillian Smith's personal life and what sort of gave her the strength and the courage and precipitated this activism at a time when, this is a time when, as you said, she had all sorts of, she took tremendous risk. We use the word today, intersectionality, to talk about the ways in which race, class, gender, and culture all intertwine and sort of work together in buttressing white supremacy and, racial injustice, that kind of thing. Hal, can you comment a little bit about her personal life with her partner and, in what ways might her sexual identity have given her some insight into the role of women in Southern society, white women in Southern society, and why that whole trope about, white womanhood and lifting them on the pedestal?
What I found interesting about her initially was how many obstacles she had to overcome. I mean, she was born to a very high-class Southern society that lost all of its money. And when they lost their money, she lost the opportunity to go to a nice college like her brothers and sisters did. Instead, she went and worked in hotels as a maid and dishwasher. And then she started teaching a little bit to make some money to go to little Piedmont college. And I wonder, these sort of things that happened to her. She wanted to be a nurse in World War I, but the war ended. And then she went to China because her sister was over there. She taught in China for a few years and then came back to run the girls' camp. I mean, I think she just developed so much of an independent spirit and so much resilience at the time that when she set her mind to writing, I think that was just one more thing that she could tackle with this sort of intelligence that she had. And at the same time she's tackling writing, she's also in the beginning of a relationship with another woman that goes on for the rest of her life, 30 years, so the same-sex relationship, even though she had had relationships with men before. But I think that experience gave her that feeling of being marginalized by society, of being shut out and sort of boxed in and being segregated in a way where she couldn't express herself freely. And so I think she began to identify much more strongly with other people who were segregated. She saw it in China, where the Chinese were treated badly by Europeans. And she came back here and immediately started doing something about it in whatever way she could by having, gatherings of Black and white people at her camp. And I think when she wrote Killers of the Dream, which I recommend people might want to start out with, she examined herself and her childhood, her parents, and she saw the effects of segregation on her soul. Basically, she saw things that had happened where her white mother and father, who she looked up to, said, "No, don't talk about that. This is the way you act with white people. This is the way you act with black people." And she saw the hypocrisy and the evil of it that stifled all white people. I mean, early on, she sees this as a white problem, and it sort of consumes her after she writes Killers of the Dream. I think she spends most of the rest of her life dealing with this sort of evil in the South and wondering, why don't people of goodwill and conscience face it? And at the same time, though, she's in the closet with her sexuality. She never talks about it. She never identifies, although her partner did later on after Lillian Smith died. And so I think that created a tension in her that she probably never resolved. And she was able to talk about racism and segregation in a way that maybe she would have liked to have talked about, the sexual repression and the way white women in the South were treated as children or deprived of their sexuality by, like you said, being put on a pedestal, while the white men were free to go around and in the past rape black women or lynch black bodies.
So let's talk a little bit about the relevancy of Lillian Smith today. Charles, I want you to weigh in on this too. To what extent is she relevant to us? How does she speak to the present moment in this era of Black Lives Matter? The film ends with Lonnie King talking about voting and the importance of voting. Can you all comment on what's the lesson for us today?
I think the important lesson is one that I advance as much as I can, and that is that for the powers that be, the folks, the money and the power, everybody else is a strange fruit. Okay, and we are all pawns in their game, and only when we realize that it doesn't matter to them what we fight about, as long as we are fighting about something. Okay, we can fight about race, religion, homosexuality, whatever, crime and punishment. Y'all fight about that, while we continue to amass more and more money at your expense and more power at your expense. And when the day comes that poor white people realize that they are as much a pawn in this game as are all the minorities that are used as pawns in this game. And if all of us were ever to get together, game over, because we will change the dynamic in this country and in the world, for that matter, in terms of sharing of power and wealth. And I think that's a large part of the message that we can get from Lillian Smith's writings and from her life. She was doing this stuff before I was born, back in the 30s. She was, an outright profound activist for equality and change and all that. And she saw how imperialism, as in the case of China, we had European imperialists, walling in the Chinese in their own country. If it happens to one, it can happen to the other. They came for the workmen. I wasn't a workman, so I didn't say anything. I didn't do anything. You remember how that goes? So when they came for me, there was nobody left to stand up. That is the lesson that we need to learn, that we're all in this together. We're all bound together, mutual thread of, whatever that was the king said. You remember the words exactly. But as far as those with the power and the money are concerned, we're just pawns in their game for their wealth and their power. And we can fight about anything. Doesn't matter to them, abortion or not abortion, Yeah, y'all fight about that.
I think that's great, because I think you're exactly right. She wrote about how Mr. Rich White would deal with the poor whites and say, we're going to give you this. We're going to give you this issue of segregation and white superiority. And you can have that, and we're going to continue to run this as a plantation. Basically, we're going to get richer, and you're going to stay poor, but you're going to have this anger, this fear. She identified all these things with the tools that she had, and she wasn't the only one saying it, but she was saying it so well, and her words still hold up today. And it is like a mirror. We can read this today, and it reflects what happened in the past, but the past is still with us. It's also part of the fiber of our society today. She was looking deep at herself, just like, whites need to be looking at themselves. And she was speaking up, just like we've seen it this summer. It's important for whites to speak up and recognize this whiteness, this power they've inherited in this society of ours. It's the only way things are going to change. So I hope people see the documentary and don't realize it's some dry history lesson. It's everything we think applies today. Not only the words of what she was saying and the demagogues that she was up against, just like demagogues today who are using just fear and anger, in order to keep power. And in the documentary, we show that. We don't show the poor whites. We show the rich, successful whites who are using segregation as a tool to keep power in society. So we hope you see that. And we wanted to end the documentary with this epilogue with George Yancey of Emory and Lonnie King saying, this is why it's important today. This is what we need to do today, and we need to be voting today, which so many people stake their lives on.
Thank you. Well,
it's an awesome job.
Mm-hmm. Go on.
The documentary is an awesome job, and all the file footage that he was able to amass is just extremely powerful. So congratulations on the documentary. It's worth seeing by everybody.
Thank you.
So I want to thank you both. I want to thank you, Charles, for being here with us, and Hal, of course, for this wonderful documentary that we will certainly use in teaching, and I encourage people to see it. So thank you both for coming.
Thank you, Vic.
My pleasure.
Thanks, everybody.